Hello.
Assalamualaikum, ma'am.
Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum.
Start.
Assalamualaikum, ma'am.
সব ভালো? How are you all?
Fine, ma'am. How are you?
Yes, ma'am. Alhamdulillah. How are you, ma'am?
Fine, alhamdulillah. Okay. So I will start the respiratory tract, respiratory system. Okay. So let us see this figure again. So I told you that we have divided the respiratory tract structurally into two, the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. Upper respiratory tract is nasal cavity and nasopharynx. So nasal cavity and nasopharynx. And lower respiratory tract start from the larynx, trachea, bronchus, different levels, different types of bronchus, then bronchioles. That means from the primary bronchus, they lie in the within this organ. We call it lung. Basically, here are the tracts, right? The tracts are important because respiration, taking oxygen and exhaling oxygen takes place to the tract. Okay, so in my last class about the nose and nasopharynx, we will talk later on. And we started from lower respiratory tract in my last class, I talked about the development of larynx. Here, we were here. So you know about the larynx, it has some cartilages, paired and unpaired, and it has some muscles, and the vocal cord is also within this within this larynx. So you have also read the gross anatomy or gone through the gross anatomy of this larynx. And I told you about the development of this part. So larynx development, I told you that the lining epithelium develops from the endoderm of the yolk sac, and other layers and the cartilages, laryngeal cartilages and muscles, they come from fusion of 4th and 6th pharyngeal arches. That is the cartilages and muscles. They come from pharyngeal arches. Konta? 4th and 6th. 4th and 6th pharyngeal arches. So I proceed in this way. So these are the things which we already talked. So again, I give always emphasis on figures and photos. If you remember, if you understand the figure, you can remember. So this yellow tube is the gut tube. And though I haven't gone through the digestive development of digestive tract, but remember, this tract is nothing but the incorporated yolk sac. Yolk sac, when the embryo folds cephalocaudally and laterally this yolk sac, you remember the lining of the yolk sac is endodermal, yellow in color, mone ache kina? So যখন এরা folding হয়, this yolk sac will be incorporated to form this digestive tract. Now this respiratory tract, it arises from the ventral wall of the upper part of the digestive tract. This one. Naturally, the lining epithelium, starting from the larynx, of course, starting from the larynx, the lining epithelium should be endodermal. তাই না? এখানে তো lining টা endodermally হবে. So I talked about the larynx. আমরা larynx নিয়ে কথা বলছি. Larynx এর lining epithelium টা in endodermal origin, and এটা আমরা চলে যাই, and the other layers of the larynx, connective tissue, cartilages, muscles, and connective tissue components of the okay, forget about this. আমি তো এটা থেকে আসছিলাম না. Anyway, lung bud, এটার দরকার নাই. So we have gone through this. এটা দরকার নাই. I have gone through this. I have gone through. এটা এখনো লাগবে না. I have gone through. এটা লাগবে না. So internal lining of the larynx originates from the endoderm but the cartilages and muscles originate from mesenchyme of the 4th and 6th pharyngeal arches. Remember here, I haven't written here except epiglottis, except epiglottis. So there is a question at the question hall. So look at this figure again. This is schematic view, schematic lateral view. So this one is the hyoid bone, lesser horn and greater horn, thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, and the other cartilage are behind. So the cartilages and muscles of the larynx are formed by fusion of mesenchyme, that is fetal connective tissue of the 4th and 6th pharyngeal arches. এই ছবিটা মনে রাখো. Remember, try to remember this figure. তাহলে মনে থাকবে. Yeah, so this is about the larynx. And because the laryngeal muscles develop from myoblast in the 4th and 6th pairs, they are supplied by the laryngeal branches of vagus nerve. But as you know, the 4th arch is supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve, and the 6th arch supplied by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So there is difference. We ask it in the exam. Now we have gone through this. Amra ajke we will start the development of trachea. Just a recapitulation. Ageta, we have finished larynx and laryngeal atresia, and now we will start trachea. So about trachea, gross anatomy, trachea start from at the lower border of the cricoid cartilage at the level of 6th cervical vertebra. ঠিক আছে, এটা মনে আছে? So trachea is 13 centimeter in length. এটা ভুলে যাই আমরা, forget এটা ভুলি. The gross anatomy of trachea, it is 13 centimeter in length in adult. Start from the lower border of the cricoid cartilage anteriorly and start from the 6th cervical vertebra posteriorly. Trachea lie within the superior mediastinum. Then at the 5th thoracic vertebra and a little portion in the middle lower inferior mediastinum. At the level of 5th thoracic vertebra, it divides into right and left principal or primary bronchus. And trachea has 16 cartilages. The cartilages are C-shaped and they are all hyaline in nature. What type of cartilage আছে in our body? 3 types: hyaline, then fibrocartilage, and then elastic cartilage. সবচেয়ে বেশি কি আছে? Hyaline. Hyaline cartilage predominates in our body. So trachea has 16 C-shaped cartilages. They are hyaline in nature. They are C-shaped and deficient posteriorly. The posterior deficient part is covered by a muscle which is known as trachealis, which is a smooth muscle. This is not a skeletal muscle. Remember, this is a smooth muscle. The benefit of this smooth muscle or trachealis muscle, এটা নিজেরাই চিন্তা করো, you can understand, because behind the trachea is the esophagus, the food pipe. Tracheaর পিছনে food pipe, esophagus. So ওখানেও যদি posteriorly, if there were cartilage, then it would have কি করতো? Hamper the passage of food in the food pipe. খোঁচা খোঁচা দিতে থাকতো. So এরকমই হয়েছে, God has created us in that way. হ্যাঁ, প্রত্যেকটা জায়গায় we should understand that how artistically or how beneficially we have been created. পিছনে কিন্তু smooth muscle, not cartilage. Just remember it. And it is a smooth muscle. So this is about the trachea in gross anatomy. Now developmentally, trachea, the endodermal lining of the respiratory diverticulum distal to the larynx, differentiates into epithelium and glands of the trachea. The language is different here. You can write in other way. তোমরা এভাবে লিখতে পারো, lining epithelium of the trachea and its glands, because there are some glands in the wall of the trachea. আছে না? Mucus secreting glands, aro glands আছে. So these glands small glands in the trachea and the lining epithelium. What type of epithelium? আমরা জিজ্ঞেস করব। Pseudo stratified ciliated columnar. Pseudo stratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So this in the larynx also. So this epithelium and the glands differentiates from the endoderm of the yolk sac. Or in other language, the endodermal lining of the respiratory diverticulum distal to the larynx differentiates into the epithelium and glands of the trachea. And দেখি, so suppose এখান থেকে trachea will start from here, এটা তো আরো বড় হবে. So the endodermal lining and glands of the trachea come from the endoderm of the yolk sac or endoderm of the gut tube. The cartilages, connective tissue, আর কি আছে tracheal wall এ? Other than this lining and glands, there are cartilages, there are connective tissues, there are muscles. So all these things come from splanchnic mesoderm surrounding the respiratory primordium or respiratory diverticulum. একই কথা। তাহলে the lining epithelium and glands of the, if there is a question in the exam, mention the developmental source of trachea, তাহলে কি হবে? ওইদিকে একটা, তাহলে হবে the lining epithelium and the glands are derived from the endoderm of the yolk sac or derived from the foregut, and foregut is derived from yolk sac, and the other layers like the cartilages, like the muscles and the connective tissue, they come from splanchnic mesoderm. So this is a formula, এটার ভুল হবে না, just remember this. এটা মুখস্থ করার কিছু নাই. So this is about our trachea. And a 4-week-old trachea, endoderm, and this is endoderm and this is mesoderm. A mesoderm then will differentiate into mesenchyme, means embryonic connective tissue, developing cartilage, and epithelium comes from endoderm of the foregut or yolk sac. So this is that smooth muscle, which is I told you trachealis muscle. So these cartilages, look at the cartilage, they are developing. এখানে পুরোপুরি হয় নাই, এখানে একটু হয়েছে, এখানে একটু 11 weeks. So these are the hyaline cartilages and they are derived from mesenchyme of the splanchnic mesoderm, and also this trachealis muscle. And 14 weeks এটা হচ্ছে trachea. So this is about the development. So the cranial part of the respiratory diverticulum differentiates into larynx and trachea. So আমরা look here. So this is the respiratory diverticulum. আমরা যদি এই ছবিটা দেখি, this is foregut, and this cranial part like here and here, এই দুইটা জায়গা, this the whole thing is respiratory diverticulum. এখানে সামনের দিকে frontal view. So the cranial part of the respiratory diverticulum differentiates into larynx and trachea. উপরে larynx, নিচে trachea. What will happen to the caudal part? দেখি. So the cranial part of the respiratory diverticulum differentiates into larynx and trachea, অথবা আমরা we can call it laryngotracheal tube. একসাথে মানে respiratory diverticulum এটা, অথবা the whole thing is respiratory diverticulum, which is an outpouching of the gut tube. আর আমরা যেখান থেকে larynx and trachea হচ্ছে, এখানে আমরা বলতে পারি একসাথে এইটুকু জায়গা laryngotracheal tube. So the laryngotracheal tube, what will happen to the distance? So look here, this is taken from another book. So the red tissue is the splanchnic mesoderm or bhitore lining endoderm. So here is this is gut, primordial pharynx and gut tube, which eta, and there is a outbudding from its ventral wall. Ventral wall. This is the laryngotracheal diverticulum or lung bud or whatever the laryngotracheal tube. So respiratory bud bola jay. So upper part develops into larynx and trachea. Then what will happen to the lower part? Lower part will divide into two. Ejecta, duta. So abar jacchi, the cranial part of the respiratory diverticulum differentiates into larynx and trachea. Laryngotracheal tube আমরা বলতে পারি এই জায়গাটাকে just here, and caudal part will divide into two. Caudal part will divide into two. The caudal part of the respiratory diverticulum divides into two outpouching, the primary bronchial buds. আমরা এটাকে বলছি primary bronchial buds. Lower part, তাহলে cranial part হচ্ছে laryngotracheal tube from where develops the larynx and trachea, and the caudal part will divide into two. আমরা এদেরকে বলি outpouching primary bronchial buds. একটা দুইটা primary bronchial buds. The primary bronchial buds grow laterally into the, remember, koi grow korbe. Where will they go? They will grow into pericardio-peritoneal canals. If you remember, I told you when I was talking about the body cavity or coelomic cavity, আমি বলেছি বারে বারে যে তিনটা, pericardial cavity, pericardio-peritoneal canals, and peritoneal cavity. And I told you pericardio-peritoneal canal will develop into the pleural cavities. তাহলে এই যে primary bronchial buds, where they will grow, একটা তো জায়গা লাগবে. So that space is pericardio-peritoneal canal, which is nothing but the primordia of the pleural cavities. So era where they will grow, এখানে একটা, they will grow into the pericardio-peritoneal cavities, which is nothing but the pleural cavities. So this is the, now here comes at a later stage of development. This is trachea, উপরে আছে larynx, so laryngotracheal tube, আর এখানে bronchial, primary bronchial diverticulum দুইটা হয়েছিল, and they grow within the pericardium. এখানে একটা pericardio-peritoneal canal, এখানে একটা pericardio-peritoneal canal, বাইরে somatic mesoderm. So look where this lung bud are growing. Pericardio-peritoneal canal, which is nothing but pleural cavities. Together with the surrounding splanchnic mesenchyme, the bronchial buds differentiate into bronchi and their ramifications in the lungs. And then with the surrounding splanchnic mesoderm here, look here, এগুলা সব splanchnic mesoderm আর বাইরে ওয়ালে somatic mesoderm. So together with the splanchnic mesoderm, a red one, they develop into the bronchial buds and their ramifications. Ramification means একটা থেকে দুইটা, দুইটা থেকে তিনটা, one will grow into two, two will grow into four, four will grow into eight, like this. So these are the ramifications. So I told you that together the surrounding splanchnic mesenchyme, the bronchial buds differentiate into the bronchi. Bronchi means plural of bronchus. There is difference between bronchus and bronchiole. Number one, important difference between bronchus and bronchiole is, in bronchiole there is no cartilage, and in bronchus or bronchi there is cartilage. Cartilage থাকলে কি হবে? The lumen will be patent. So gas will go, মানে গ্যাসটা পাস করতে পারে, airটা, gas means air, sorry. So bronchus or bronchi has cartilage, but when it becomes a bronchiole and very small in diameter, they become bronchiole, যেখানে কোনো cartilage নাই, but they have smooth muscles, and which these smooth muscles are regulated by the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. So these bronchial buds differentiate into bronchi, means bronchus, and their ramifications in the lungs. So they will differentiate into bronchus, যেমন এইটা আমি দিয়েছি principal bronchus or primary bronchus, and then 3 for right lung, 2 for left lung, secondary bronchial buds or secondary bronchus. Secondary bronchus, এটা হচ্ছে principal bronchus or primary bronchus, তারপরে left lung এর জন্য দুইটা, right lung এর জন্য তিনটা, and then they will divide. So this is about the bronchial tree. So in the 5th week, the connection of each bronchial bud with the trachea enlarges to form the primordium of principal or primary bronchus. So connections of each bronchial bud with the trachea connection of each bronchial bud. এটা তো bronchial bud ছিল, হ্যাঁ, এরকম একটা bud ছিল, এরকম একটা ছিল. So this connection of the bronchial bud with the trachea will become like this. এরকম হয়ে যাচ্ছে. And now we call it, now we call it the primary bronchus or principal bronchus. So we have got the primary or principal bronchus there. So about the primary or principal bronchus, again in gross anatomy, কয়টা আছে primary or principal bronchus? 2. One for each lung. And we often ask you the difference between the right and left principal or primary bronchus. হ্যাঁ, এটা আমরা পরীক্ষার সময় খুবই আসে because there is a clinical importance. Because the right principal bronchus is narrower, longer, and more in line with the trachea. Trachea সাথে লাইনটা বেশি than the left. As a result, there is more chance of infection in the right lung. And also, ওখানে একটা ইয়ে আছে যে whenever a patient is unconscious or semi-conscious or the patient is vomiting, what we do, আমরা বলি কি তাকে বাম কাত করে শুয়ে দেন. Not done, not on the right side, but tilt the patient on the left side. যাতে right lung এ nothing can enter. So you have to know about this. So আমরা principal bronchus পেয়ে গেলাম. Right and left principal bronchus or primary bronchus. Now the principal or primary bronchus divide into secondary or lobar bronchi. তাহলে এটা হয়ে যাবে principal will divide into secondary or lobar. Secondary, এটা ছিল principal or primary, then secondary or lobar. So there are 2 lobes in left lung, 3 lobe in right lung. তাহলে for the right lung there are 3 lobar or secondary bronchus. For the left lung there is 2 secondary or lobar bronchus. ঠিক আছে? Left lung এ there are 2 lobes. Right lung এ 3টা lobe আছে. তাহলে left lung এ 3টা lobar bronchus or 3টা secondary bronchus. একই কথা, same thing, lobar or secondary. The principal or primary bronchi divide into secondary or lobar bronchi, then tertiary or segmental bronchi. So tertiary or segmental bronchi, and then intersegmental branches, and ultimately bronchioles. That means তাদের কোনো cartilage থাকবে না. There will be no cartilages in the bronchioles. So the principal bronchus or primary bronchus will give rise to secondary or lobar bronchus, then tertiary and segmental. The tertiary কয়টা? How many? 10 for each lung. Trachea, primary or principal bronchi, secondary or lobar, and then tertiary bronchi or segmental bronchi, 10 for each. 10 for each. And then they will give rise to bronchopulmonary segment. আমরা জিজ্ঞেস করব. So bronchi and lungs, the segmental or tertiary bronchi, 10 in each lung, begin to form by the 7th week. As this occurs, the surrounding mesenchyme also divides. Whenever the segmental bronchi are produced or have the secondary bronchi are, if the secondary bronchi divides into the segmental bronchi, 10 for each lung, at the same time, the surrounding mesenchyme also divides like this, again. Whenever there is, look here, এখানে কি? The lobar bronchus, secondary 1 and 2, 1, 2, 3. Then the tertiary or segmental bronchi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the mesenchyme, splanchnic mesoderm, also start to divide. আগে তো এরকম ছিল, splanchnic mesoderm একদম সোজা, like this. Now the splanchnic mesoderm start to divide in 8 weeks. Also divides. Each segmental bronchus with its surrounding mass of mesenchyme is the primordium of bronchopulmonary segment. So each segmental bronchus with its surrounding splanchnic mesoderm or mesenchyme is the primordium of bronchopulmonary segment. Now, how many bronchopulmonary segments are there in each lung? 10 in each lung for right and left. What is a bronchopulmonary segment? The area, the structurally and functionally independent area of lung tissue supplied by segmental bronchus. Etai to answer. Structurally and functionally separated area of lung tissue aerated by segmental bronchus. Etai bronchopulmonary segment. Now, by 24, so we have completed about the bronchial tree up to bronchus, up to segmental bronchi, we have reached. Up to then, after the segmental bronchi, there are few ramifications, and then ramifications, and then bronchioles. Okay. Now, by 24 weeks, that is 6 months of a fetus, about 17 orders of branches have formed, and respiratory bronchioles have developed. So up to the segmental bronchi, we know, আমরা তো segmental bronchi পর্যন্ত চলে আসছি. Sorry, here, look here, segmental bronchi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 segmental bronchi. আমরা দেখলাম এখানে, হ্যাঁ, segmental bronchi. And these segmental bronchi, by 24 weeks, they divide 17 times. About 17 orders of branches are formed, and then যখন 17 orders of branches will occur, হয়ে যাবে, then respiratory bronchioles have developed. So the segmental bronchi, by 24 weeks, the segmental bronchi will give rise to 17 order of branches, 17 orders of branches, মানে একটা থেকে দুইটা, দুইটা থেকে তিনটা, তিনটা থেকে, and have formed. When 17 orders of branches have formed, respiratory bronchioles have developed. So respiratory bronchiole পর্যন্ত আসা মানে up to respiratory bronchiole, and then respiratory bronchiole এর আগে there was the terminal bronchiole. So up to the terminal bronchiole is the conducting zone, right? Up to the terminal bronchiole. And from the respiratory bronchiole to the alveoli is the respiratory zone. তাহলে 6 months or 24 weeks respiratory bronchiole have formed. 6 মাসে respiratory bronchiole টা হয়ে যায়. So this is the, now an additional 7 orders of airways develop after birth. So totally ওখানে 17 order. By 6 months, about 17 orders of branches have formed and respiratory bronchioles have developed. আর তারপরে ওই 6 month থেকে 7 month, 8 month, 9 month পর্যন্ত এটুকুই থাকে up to this, the 17 order, and other 7 orders, আরো 7 orders of airways develop after birth. More 17 order altogether, কতটা order হলো? 24 and 17 and 7, how many? 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 orders in total. So 6th week up to 24th week, 17 orders from the segmental bronchus, 17 orders of bronchus develop, and up to within 6 months or 24 weeks, respiratory bronchiole have formed. তারপরে ওই 7 month, 8 month এরকম, and then after birth, আরো 7 order after birth. So we sometimes ask it. As the bronchi develop, cartilaginous plates develop from the surrounding splanchnic mesoderm. Everything comes from splanchnic mesoderm, cartilaginous plate, because in the bronchi, that is in the bronchus, there not like trachea. It's not like trachea that there is C-shaped cartilages. কি থাকে এখানে? What lies here? The different shapes of hyaline cartilaginous plates. Hyaline cartilaginous plates. So they formed from the splanchnic mesoderm or mesenchyme. The bronchial smooth muscle, connective tissue, pulmonary connective tissue, capillaries, everything develops from splanchnic mesenchyme or splanchnic mesoderm. Jodi boli splanchnic mesoderm is okay. So source of development of the whole bronchial tree, from starting from the trachea, jodi boli, tale lining is the gut, the formula, the endoderm of the foregut, lining and gland, and other layers and cartilages come from the surrounding splanchnic mesoderm or mesenchyme. Now, as the lungs develop, they acquire a layer of visceral pleura from the splanchnic. Even the visceral pleura, the pleura, which has two layers, if you remember, একটা হচ্ছে visceral pleura, আরেকটা হচ্ছে parietal. Parietal pleura lines the thoracic cavity. Our visceral pleura lines the lung. The other name of the visceral pleura is the pulmonary pleura. Remember that this visceral layer, এটা কিন্তু normally we cannot pull it off. তুলতে পারি না, এত tightly লেগে থাকে গায়ে. But if there is any disease, it can be separated. So this visceral layer, always remember, this is also a formula. This visceral layer of anything, pleura or peritoneum, whatever, they come from splanchnic mesoderm. It's a formula. And the parietal layer of the pleura and the parietal layer of the peritoneum, they come from somatic layer of splanchnic mesoderm. This is a formula, remember. So as the lungs develop, they acquire a layer of visceral pleura from the splanchnic mesenchyme or mesoderm. So look here, this is taken from Langman, this picture. It's a lalta. So this is the pericardio-peritoneal canal. Look here, look at the arrows. Etar moddhe this trachea and the bronchial tree is growing. ঠিক আছে? And also surrounded by splanchnic mesoderm. আশেপাশে তো পরে this will become the lung. And this cavity, the pericardio-peritoneal cavity, is the pleural cavity. And this red layer is the visceral pleura, and বাইরে যেটা আছে, which surrounds the thoracic cavity, is the parietal layer or parietal pleura. It comes from somatic mesoderm, and the visceral pleura comes from splanchnic mesoderm. Now, with expansion, the lungs and the pleural cavities grow caudally into the mesenchyme of the body wall and soon lies close to the heart. Now, the lung expands, bronchi expands, the lung tissue expands, and the pleural cavity grows more and more caudally, where into the mesenchyme of the body wall and soon lie close to the heart. This will come here and come here. Forget about this. And thoracic body wall becomes lined by a layer of parietal pleura derived from somatic mesoderm. So I have already told you. So if you think about a balloon, if you think that your pleural cavity is a balloon and balloon moddhe bronchial tree is growing, this red layer is the visceral pleura, pericardio-peritoneal canal. It will become pleural cavity, and বাইরে যেটা আছে, that is the parietal pleura. Now, so we have finished the development of lung. Now, maturation of lungs. So maturation of lung occurs in 4 stages, or in 4, we can divide the maturation of lung into 4 periods. So remember or think of that the respiratory tract, it comes from your gut tube. Gut tube থেকে আসছে, but the function is not absorption and digestion, but the function is respiration. That means taking off or infusion of oxygen and exhalation of carbon dioxide. এটাই তো respiration. So the layer, the lining epithelium, glands, and the structure should be changed should be changed from digestion and absorption to respiration. But এটা কিন্তু আসছে gut থেকেই। And maturation of lung occurs in 4 periods. ঠিক আছে, আমরা একটু বলি। So the periods are, remember it comes in exam. It আসে, this time there was a question, this prof exam, that describe or explain or describe the stages of maturation of lung. So this maturation of lung is divided into 4 periods. Number 1, pseudoglandular period. Number 2, canalicular period. Number 3, terminal saccular period. Number 4, alveolar period. So pseudoglandular period means, pseudo means false. Like it develops up to this, je mone hobe we think that it is a gland from the digestive tube. Number 2, canalicular. ওখানে অনেকগুলো ক্যানালের মতো থাকবে। And number 3, terminal saccular period. That means there are some sacs. Sacs গুলা কি are the saccules are the primordia of alveoli. The alveoli na hole to respiration is not possible. So terminal saccular period and ultimately alveolar period. So there are 4 stages of maturation of lung tissue. Now the pseudoglandular period, this period start from 5 to 6 weeks to 16 weeks. তার মানে embryonic period is up to 8 weeks. তার মানে embryonic period এর আগে, that means 5th to 6th week, that means, sorry, fetal period, before fetal period, 5 থেকে 6 week to 16 weeks, that is 4 months, is the pseudoglandular period. কি হয়? The developing lung somewhat resemble an exocrine gland. Lungটাকে histologically একটা exocrine gland এর মতো লাগে. That means there will be duct, right? And there will be like acini or follicular structure, like acini like structure. So developing lung somewhat resembles an exocrine gland. By 16 weeks, the conducting parts of the bronchial tree up to terminal bronchioles have formed, except those involved with gas exchange. That means the part of the bronchial tree which is destined for gaseous exchange start from respiratory bronchiole. তাহলে কি respiratory bronchiole, then alveolar duct, then alveolar sac, alveoli, right? So by 16 weeks, this term, the pseudoglandular period, কেন বলেছি, histologically it looks like a gland. What happens here? It is up to 16 weeks, starting from 5 to 6 weeks. কি হয়? The conducting parts of the bronchial tree have formed. You know up to which level the conducting part is, up to the terminal bronchioles. Kintu gas exchange, the part which is involved with gas exchange is not formed. So what do you think? A baby which will be born at 16 weeks will definitely die. Respiration is not possible. So baby will not, baby or the fetus is not viable. Fetus will not survive. Respiration নাই, তাহলে survive করবে কেমনে? লাং নষ্ট হয়ে গেলে হবে? এটা হবে না, it will not survive. So this is pseudoglandular period, and this is a schematic histological view of the lung at the pseudoglandular period. দেখো আমরা দেখি 5 to 6 weeks to 16 weeks. This is the terminal bronchiole, terminal bronchiole with the lining epithelium, and the mesenchyme, that is the splanchnic mesoderm, so connective tissue, the capillaries are there, so everything comes from splanchnic mesoderm. এটাকে দেখতে একটা glandular model, because it seems like a duct. It seems like a duct, and a tissue it seems like acini or something like that. That's why this is pseudoglandular period. It is from 5 to 6 weeks to 16 weeks. Respiration is not formed. Okay, then the respiration is not possible. Hence, fetuses born during this period are unable to survive, or the fetus is not viable to survive. Respiration is not possible, and hence the fetuses born during this period are unable to survive. Next, canalicular period. Canalicular period start from 16 weeks to 26 weeks. তার মানে কত? 26 4 মাস থেকে কত হবে? 4 6 6.5 months. So canalicular period is 16 to 26 weeks. What happens here? During the initial part, now this period there is a range. Look here, 16 থেকে 26, that is 16 to 26 weeks. So এখানে there is a range, তাই না, এই সময়টা. So the initial part of this period, the lumina of the bronchi and the terminal bronchioles become larger. এই initial period, এই period-এর মধ্যে, the initial period-এ the terminal bronchiole which have been formed, the lumen of the terminal bronchioles become larger, to বড় হয়, and the lung tissue becomes highly vascular. This is very important. Blood vessels should be there. Lung tissue, lung is highly vascular organ because respiration takes place between alveoli and capillaries. So there are so many capillaries in lung. So there are because respiration takes place between alveoli and the capillaries. That is why lung is a highly vascular organ. So canalicular period, which is from 16 to 26 weeks, that is এখানে 10 week-এর একটা range. Initial part of this canalicular period, what happens? The terminal bronchiole, which have been formed in the pseudoglandular period, they become larger. And the lung tissue, which are the other tissues which come from splanchnic mesoderm or mesenchyme, they become highly vascular. তাহলে একটু দেখি. So during like এটারই কিন্তু এর পরে from 16 weeks to 26 weeks, maybe মানে initial part of 16 weeks to 10 weeks, maybe 28 weeks, maybe 29 weeks, sorry, maybe 17 or 18 or 19 weeks, the lumen of the terminal bronchiole become larger, and the lung tissue, the capillary, it becomes highly vascular. Remember, I told you in fetus, where there is mesenchyme, where the blood vessels can grow de novo. Blood vessels কিন্তু নিজে নিজে grow করতে পারে, but not after birth. বার্থের পরে কিছু কিছু হয়, ramifications বাড়ে, but new vasculogenesis হয় না. It's not possible. But before birth, where there is mesenchyme, blood vessels can grow de novo. So here, the blood vessels, more and more capillaries grow. By 24 weeks, that is the terminal part of the canalicular period, each terminal bronchiole has given rise to 2 or more respiratory bronchioles. তাহলে by 24 weeks, that is the terminal part of the canalicular period. এক একটা terminal bronchiole divides into 2 or more respiratory bronchiole. Look here, আমি একটু ছবি দেখাই. So this is taken from another book. Up to this is the terminal bronchiole, এখান পর্যন্ত. But in 24 weeks, each terminal bronchiole give rise to 2 or more respiratory bronchiole. এখানে 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So by 24 weeks, each terminal bronchiole give rise to 2 or more respiratory bronchiole. তার মানে কি? Active respiration is possible by 24 weeks. The terminal bronchiole has given rise to, so the terminal bronchiole has given rise to 2 or more respiratory bronchiole. Look here, this is taken from Langman. Each respiratory bronchiole then divides into 3 to 6 tubular passages, the alveolar duct. Again, the respiratory bronchiole will give rise to 3 or more, that is 3 to 6 tubular passages. Tubule ki? Tubule hochhe tube er choto bhai. Tubules are younger brother of tube. Tahole by 24 weeks, respiratory bronchioles will be formed, and then each respiratory bronchiole will give rise to 3 to 6 tubular passages, which are the alveolar ducts. Tahole each respiratory bronchiole will give rise to kind of figure pi, nice. So each respiratory bronchiole will give rise to 3 or more tubular passages, the alveolar duct. So respiration is possible. Kano? Because by 24 weeks, respiratory bronchioles are formed. And by 25 or 26 weeks, some alveolar ducts are also formed. And we know from the respiratory bronchiole to alveoli is the respiratory zone. So respiration is possible at the end of canalicular period, because some thin wall primary terminal sacules are also formed. Sacules are the primordia of alveoli, develops at the ends of respiratory bronchioles, and the lung tissue is well vascularized. So at the end of canalicular period, respiration is possible, but should be given enough effort. 26 weeks total. So canalicular period, end of canalicular period, respiration is possible because respiratory bronchioles are there are alveolar ducts, and at the end of canalicular period, there are some terminal sacules. Sacules are the primordia of the alveoli. So respiration is possible. During this period, many more terminal sacules develop. And now, so we have finished the canalicular period. 16 থেকে 26, 26 weeks. Respiration ta shambhav. Now we will go to the third stage, the terminal sacular period, 26 weeks to birth. 26 weeks to birth means birth mane ki 38 weeks. During this period, many more terminal sacules are developed and their epithelium becomes very thin. This is very important. Respiration হওয়ার জন্য the epithelium should be very thin. Thin epithelium কি? Simple squamous epithelium. If there is not, because the change terminal bronchial থেকে the lining epithelium start to change. The pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium becomes simple columnar, and then becomes simple cuboidal, and then ultimately simple squamous in the alveoli. Because if that is not simple squamous or thin epithelium, respiration is not possible. At the uchu epithelium, their respiration is not possible. So during this terminal sacular period, many more terminal sacules. I told you sacules are the primordia of alveoli. The terminal sacules start to form at the end of canalicular period, kintu kom. But terminal sacular period, which start from 26 weeks to birth, many more terminal sacules, that is primordia of alveoli, are formed, and their epithelium becomes very thin. Their epithelium, এই যে এখানে দেখো epitheliumটা অনেক চিকন হয়ে যাচ্ছে, they become very thin, and capillaries, this is important, capillaries begin to bulge into these developing alveoli. So capillaries begins to bulge. Look at the capillary, আগে দেখেছি capillary অনেক, but later on this capillary begin to bulge, এই যে bulge into this terminal saccus or sac, এই যে গায়ের মধ্যে bulge. So 1, 2, 3 scapullaries begin to bulge. So during this period, many more terminal saccus develop and their epithelium becomes very thin, that is simple squamous, and capillaries begin to bulge into these developing alveoli. Now, the intimate contact between the epithelium and endothelial cells of the capillaries establish a blood-air barrier. So, what is the blood-air area? Barrier? The lining epithelium of the alveoli, the basement membrane of the lining epithelium, the interstitial space, the basement membrane of the capillary endothelium, and the capillary endothelium. So the capillary endothelium is simple squamous, very thin. The lining epithelium of alveoli is also simple squamous, very thin. And so respiration, that is gaseous exchange, is possible now. So the intimate contact between the epithelial and endothelial cells establish a blood-air barrier. And এখানে blood-air barrier here, 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 here. So I'm finished in terminal saccular period. So by 26 weeks, the terminal saccus are lined mainly by simple squamous epithelium of endodermal origin, type 1 alveolar cells, or pneumocytes 1, across which gas exchange occurs. So we know that the alveoli are lined by simple squamous epithelium, which is type 1 alveolar cells, type 1 alveolar cells, or type 1 pneumocytes. And through these type 1 pneumocytes, which are simple squamous in nature, gaseous exchange occur. Look here, look at the cells, the squamous cells, simple squamous, thin cells, and the capillary endothelium here. So here, gaseous exchange occur. So this area is the blood-air barrier between capillary and alveoli, and we also call it respiratory membrane. So terminal sac period begins at the 26th week. In the figure above, we can see, okay, forget about this, and the bath. Now scattered among the simple squamous epithelial cells are rounded secretory epithelial cells, type 2 alveolar cells, or type 2 pneumocytes. Also, there are type 2, they also come from the endoderm of the yolk sac. What is the function of this type 2 alveolar cells? To secrete surfactant, which reduce the surface tension of the alveoli, so that the alveoli will not collapse fully. Will not collapse fully after the first inhalation. যখন প্রথম we respire after birth, the alveoli will inflate, and then passively some air will come out along with carbon dioxide, but the alveoli will not fully collapse because of this surfactant layer. If the alveoli fully collapse, what will happen? Every time the child will have to inhale with force inspiration, and exhalation is passive প্রত্যেকবার. So there is respiratory distress syndrome. The baby will suffer from respiratory distress syndrome. If there is no type 2 alveolar cells, there is no surfactant. Type 2 pneumocytes secrete pulmonary surfactant, a complex mixture of phospholipid. Surfactant lowers surface tension at the air-alveolar interface. It reduces the surface tension at the air-alveolar interface. আমরা এটা শেষ করে দিয়েছি. Production of surfactant increases during terminal stages of pregnancy, particularly during the last 2 weeks. Remember, this surfactant layer, this type 2 pneumocytes, that is the cells, type 2 pneumocytes, this production of surfactant Type 2 pneumocytes are formed at the terminal saccular period, but the production of the surfactant, that is a phospholipid, they increases during the last 2 weeks. So if the baby is born premature, there will be lack of surfactant. So prematurity is a very important factor for developing respiratory distress syndrome. তখন কি করে, they will take the baby to incubator for assisted respiration, and they will start to give steroid so that the surfactant are produced profusely. Now, consequently, fetus is born prematurely at 24 to 26 weeks after fertilization may survive if given intensive care. However, may suffer from respiratory distress because of surfactant deficiency. Now, by 28 weeks after fertilization, sufficient terminal saccades and surfactant are present to permit survival. Now, we will ask a question, what is the viable age of a fetus? Answer is 28 weeks. আমরা এখনো 28 weeks বলি। Because কেন viable? Because sufficient capillaries, there are sufficient terminal saccades, that means primordia of alveoli, and there are sufficient surfactant to permit survival of the prematurely born infant, 7 মাস, 28 weeks, but have to give in much effort, অনেক কিছু করতে হয়। Now, alveolar period, 32 weeks to 8 years after birth, এখানে একটু mark. This organ, this lung, this is one of the organ, আমরা আরেকটু পরে বলবো regarding kidney, which develops even after birth. This alveolar period start from 32 weeks to 8 years after birth, 8 years after birth. Structure analogous to alveoli are present at 32 weeks from saccades. The epithelial lining of the terminal saccades attenuates to an extremely thin squamous epithelium. মানে আরো চিকন হতে থাকে epithelial lining টা. So structures analogous to alveoli, মানে alveoli মতো structure যেগুলোকে আমরা saccades বলছি, they are present at 32 weeks, but the epithelial lining টা আরো চিকন হবে, attenuation হবে later on, আরো পরে, and so এটা দরকার নাই। The type 1 alveolar cells become so thin that adjacent capillaries bulge, I have already told. By the late fetal life, alveolo-capillary membrane or pulmonary deficient respiratory membrane sufficiently thin to allow gas exchange. The transition from dependence on placenta for gas exchange to autonomous gas, no need. About 50 million alveoli, that is 1/6 of the adult number, are present in the lungs of a full-term newborn infant. This is important. 50 million alveoli, that is 1/6 of the adult number, are present in the lungs of a full-term newborn infant. Full-term newborn are up to 8 years. By 8 years, there are 300 million alveoli. This is one organ which develop after birth. Ki hoy? Simple answer, the number of alveoli increase. Like a full-term newborn infant, there are 50 million alveoli in 2 lungs. 50 million. Are by 8 years, there are 300 million alveoli. So the number of alveoli increase up to 8 years. So fetal breathing movement begins before birth and cause aspiration. So we finish it here. Are it a darker nine? No, baby, you don't need it. She corale matha thakbe na. So So we have finished the respiratory system. So you know about this, এটা অনেক আসে পরীক্ষায়, respiratory distress syndrome or RDS. It affects about 2% of live-born infants, and those born prematurely are more susceptible. Write short notes on RDS or hyaline membrane disease, HMD. So we can start that it affects 2% of live-born infant. That is very common. 2% means 2 in 100, and those who are born prematurely suffer more, and these infants develop rapid labored breathing shortly after birth. Rapid labored breathing shortly after birth. It is also known as hyaline membrane disease. This is a histological term. Just remember, it is a hyaline membrane disease. It is also known as hyaline membrane disease. Surfactant deficiency is a major cause of RDS. RDS can develop for other reasons, but major cause is the deficiency of surfactant layer. The lungs are underinflated and alveoli contain fluid with a high protein content and resembles HMD. So we have finished it. And this is a summary document. So we finished the respiratory system today. Okay, thank you. And I told